we're seeing about 30% being transacted programmatically across all of publishers that we work with. So 70% is still transacted from a direct IO perspective.
A lot of people will think about programmatic auctions as being fair and balanced. In reality, functionally, that's not necessarily the case, correct?
Yeah, I mean, you have all the same levers within programmatic that you do in direct sold, right? And that's that's really something that's been asked of us as a business, as our clients expand on their programmatic business.
I think for many advertisers, one of the more challenging components to CTV is understanding how publishers are thinking about monetizing their inventory. How important is direct sold versus programmatic? How are they prioritizing different buyers and inventory within their portfolios? And how nimble can you be when there's a massive spike in traffic around a live event? That's why I was excited to chat with Hamer Farag, Director of Strategic Relationships at Freewheel, for our first episode. Freewheel is owned by Comcast, and they work with a number of the top CTV publishers. As a result, that puts them in a unique place to understand how publishers think about monetizing their inventory and what their priorities are. In this episode, Hamer shares with us a number of insights, including the reality that programmatic still represents a relatively small but growing and increasingly more important piece of the pie. And that's why it's so important for us to understand the tools that Freewheel provides to their publishers. Those tools and how they're used impact the CTV campaigns that you run every day. So if you're running CTV now, or you plan to run CTV in the future, I think you'll find value in this conversation. So Hamer, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Jared. I'm excited to be here, excited to dive into all things CTV and ad programmatic monetization.
If you don't mind, if you could give like a little bit of a background on sort of your role and sort of where you play in the world of Freewheel, that'd be a great place to start.
At Freewheel, I manage publisher relationships here. I work across a number of different publishers in terms of standing up not only their programmatic and marketplace business, but also supporting their ads business holistically. So plugging into players, making sure we're adhering to carriage agreements, making sure we're delivering on direct sold campaigns, while also helping them stand up a programmatic structure that meets their business needs so they can ultimately deliver the highest CPM per impression.
I think it'd be helpful to sort of unpack for folks who may be less familiar with Freewheel. Like, again, you guys play on sort of two sides of the equation. From a publisher perspective, you're in the SSP space, and maybe defining for everybody what an SSP actually does. You're in the ad server space as well, and the two are sort of, very closely related. And maybe share a little bit in terms of some of the publishers that you work with so people have a good understanding of where you sit in the ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Freewheel, first and foremost, is an ad server, right? We've been in the space for upwards of 15 years now, building the best in class video ad serving technology to support the ever scaling segment on the video front. So from a distributor perspective, from a reseller perspective, from a programmer perspective, we've always supported them in terms of delivering against their ad campaigns in a direct sold capacity. And historically, a lot of those partners have scaled on the programmatic front. And as we've evolved our company to meet the market needs, we have built up programmatic technologies that fit within the ad server as a whole. And so what does that mean to a publisher, right? Historically, a lot of publishers have worked with standalone SSPs, meaning that the SSP is built outside of the ad server. So the ad server is making a decision based on all of the demand that it sees. And historically, a standalone SSP would be outside of that ad server. So you'd be piping supply to that SSP. The SSP would be making a decision on the supply that you are sending over to them via a tag-based request. It would then return demand back to your ad server. That demand would then be considered in relation to everything else that's running within the ad server, whether it be direct sold campaigns, carriage agreements, distribution rights, barter deals, so on and so forth. Freewheel has taken that and tried to simplify it within the ad stack and allowed you to plug directly into all of your SSP and DSP partners through our standalone programmatic module. And so this allows for you to get demand directly back via an ORTB based setting, so tag list based connections to your demand partners to then return demand to the ad opportunity, which is considered amongst everything else running in the ad server within one full sweep decision.
And so presumably that would obviously clearly offer some benefits to both publisher and buy side. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit on the benefits of having both the SSP and the ad server, integrated in the way that you described?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like in the industry, we always hear about supply path optimization, right? How do I get as close to the supply as possible? You're never going to get closer to the supply than living within the ad server where the supply is hosted itself, right? And so one of the biggest advantages of hosting the programmatic tech within the ad server is that we are bringing demand partners much closer to the supply and where it lives. This allows for you to compete in a much more holistic auction rather than competing external of the ad server and then only having to compete again once the opportunity reaches the ad server itself. So what we've seen from this is our programmers, our distributors, resellers, and all of our partners that run within Freewheel have seen an increased win rate, increased CPM, and increased revenue as we brought on those direct demand integrations to Freewheel.
Yeah. So essentially, you're bringing, the supply much closer to the buyers and vice versa. The buyers are a lot closer to the supply.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
everybody can transact a little bit more efficiently as a result.
Yep, exactly. And it really creates more efficiencies on both sides because we are not only getting them closer to the supply, but we're also passing them more information on that supply so that they can adjust their bidding behavior so they can win more often. And on the other end, we are able to review troubleshooting reasons for failed and filtered reasons and give that information back to the demand partners so that they can adjust on their side and we can increase win rates holistically on both ends.
Which is a real, I think, clear and obvious benefit for anyone who's set up PMPs in the CTV marketplace or any marketplace for that matter. There is, I don't know, a 70 or 80% fail rate in the sense that there's going to be some sort of technical challenge as it relates to getting that set up. What you're seeing in terms of avails, win rates, all the things you just described. So, yeah, I could see that as a definite clear advantage because from a business perspective, right, if you're on the buy side, the agency side, or even on the publisher side, you don't want impediments or speed bumps to being able to, spend money and launch campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like at the end of the day, the publishers have a pool of supply that they're trying to monetize in a very seamless way. Demand partners have a budget which they're trying to reach and make sure they're reaching the right audience. And by connecting the dots between both and giving both the information that they need in order to transact as seamlessly as possible, we see them win, right? And so for the publisher side, what that means is we help them in terms of understanding the supply that they have and how that's being seen on the demand side, how they can use the tools at their disposal within the Freewheel tech to layer in attributes to make their supply seen in a better fashion, whether it be appending metadata attributes, adjusting their metadata that goes through the market, and then also layering in yield optimization tools to make sure that the opportunity delivers where it needs to deliver and when it needs to deliver. That allows for the publishers to be more flexible while also gleaning the information from the demand side to help their partners adjust budgets so that both parties win at the end of the day.
You mentioned metadata a few times, and I think one of the challenges in CTV is a lack of standardization with regard to sort of what metadata and what information is passed through a bid request from various publishers through various SSPs through various DSPs. What role is Freewheel playing in that? To maybe help to standardize and simplify some of that.
Yeah, I mean, from a metadata perspective, the IB has done a really good job in terms of standardizing attributes that could be passed from the supply side and seen on the demand side, whether it be on the app object or on the content side of things. And our role on the Freewheel end is really to help our publishers understand how to leverage those metadata attributes to put their best foot forward to their demand partners. So on our side, we try to work with our publishers to do metadata audits holistically so that they can understand where there might be gaps in their metadata. So are they passing the correct app bundle, the app store URL, the device type? All of those details are going to allow the demand partner to understand where the opportunity is running. And then on the other end of that, do they want to level up and provide even more data to their demand partners, or some demand partners who may promise scale in return for receiving more information around the content items? So what series is running, when is it running, and the TV rating, the genre, so on and so forth. There's a lot that you can pass to your demand partners so that they can understand more information on what the supply is. And then the inverse of that, the demand side can use that information to ensure that they are reaching the audience that they need to reach, and adjusting bidding behaviors to send more budgets to partners that may have a clean metadata set because the algorithm favors that.
And who are some of the publishers that a lot of people would recognize that you guys support?
I mean, from the publisher side, we've always historically supported a lot of the major distributors in the space, some of which you might know, some of which are also competitors to ourselves, and then some of the programmers as well, large scale programmers that a lot of people in the space might recognize. Don't know if I can name any names here, but there's a number of different programmers, resellers, and distributors that have always been in the space that we've supported for years on end and helped their business not only run, but also scale towards the programmatic space and continue to increase monetization efforts as we've layered onto our marketplace technologies.
Yep. So let's level set on that a little bit, right? So, one of your objectives in your role, as you described, is to sort of help scale or enable publishers to scale their monetization efforts around programmatic specifically. But can you level set, with us, or in terms of, from a ratio perspective, what you see across the different publishers you work with in terms of how much of their inventory they're currently monetizing on a direct or PG basis versus biddable or programmatic?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a good thing to level set there, because a lot of what we're hearing in the industry is everything is moving to programmatic, right? Like that's where the industry is moving. We all need to shift our full focus to programmatic. That's when you look at the numbers, that's truly not the case, right? We're seeing about 30% being transacted programmatically across all of publishers that we work with, and across the video ecosystem. That's typically the number that we see there as well. So 70% is still transacted from a direct IO perspective. So that we still need to make sure that we're supporting customers in meeting their direct IO needs while also enabling them to monetize all of the incremental supply in a seamless fashion through programmatic connection. So programmatic is really important, but direct sold is equally, if not more important. And then even looking at linear, everyone continues to say linear is dead. It's very much not the case. Linear is still very much a focus for a lot of partners that we work with today, and I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. So we're not only helping to support customers from a direct sold perspective, but also a linear perspective and a programmatic end. And that's where the full ad stack on the Freewheel side really helps empower those types of businesses, because when you're making a decision across priority buckets, across modules, whether it be direct, linear, programmatic, marketplace, having all of that information live in one place will allow you to make the best unified ad decision for your business to ensure that you're continuing to meet your direct IO needs while driving the highest revenue on the programmatic front as well.
Yeah. So what exactly are you guys doing on the linear side to help enable transactions there?
I mean, linear, we've always supported linear across the board from a scheduling perspective, from an ad serving perspective, and then also we're working with some of our partners to enable programmatic from the linear addressable side of things. So we've been testing this with a couple of our partners, and trying to continue to evolve that, as some partners are leaning more into this transaction bucket. The problem with linear is we don't always have the data that we need to help help them transact from a programmatic perspective. But as we start to get more data on the linear front, we're able to open up more sales channels for that pool of supply.
So I guess to be a little bit more specific, that I think boils down to sort of dynamic ad insertion on set-top box inventory, essentially, correct?
Yeah, I mean, if you're able to move towards a DAI based environment for set top box, then we see a lot of partners doing that. The problem is on the demand side, there's a little bit of a misconception on what that pool of supply is and how to monetize it in an effective and efficient manner. So there's a constant education barrier that we see, and we're trying to continue to educate our demand partners on how to bid on that pool of supply outside of just, hey, CTV is important. We are the premium pool of CTV supply in the ecosystem, but we also host a lot of set-top box supply, a lot of in-app mobile web supply as well. That is, if not just as premium as CTV supply. So educating our buyers on how to transact with that is really important, and we're trying to focus on that for years to come.
Yep. Maybe I'll learn something new today. My understanding is that most DSPs aren't even necessarily tapped into that inventory, or is that a misconception on my part?
So DSPs can tap into that inventory today, from a set-top box perspective, and we do see DSPs transacting on set-top box. We just don't see them transacting in the same manner as they do CTV. So we see a much higher bid rate on CTV than we do set-top box, but that's not to say that DSPs can't handle set-top box inventory. They do receive it, and they are able to monetize against it. It's just a matter of them adjusting their bidding behavior to monetize the set-top box inventory, and also let us know, like, what are they looking for within set-top box inventory? How can we make that more attractive to buyers? We're working with our publishers in bundling that with their overall pool of supply so that buyers can purchase it alongside their CTV inventory, so they can have some incremental reach on that pool of audience.
Yeah. And not to get too technical, but using Trade Desk as an example, based on what you just described, I would assume that ultimately, from a tactical perspective, a buyer would want to put that inventory in a separate deal ID and maybe put it in a separate campaign entirely, because the targeting and the things that you're going to apply to that campaign probably do need to or should look different, because you're going to run into challenges around ID and identity matching and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, and user agent comes into play a lot with set-top box. And so having a good user agent parser is going to really help you put your best foot forward. And so, yeah, breaking that out into its own deal ID is really important. And then also identifying set-top box when it needs to be identified, right? I think a lot of publishers are focused on their metadata attributes, which is great, and we want to help them with that, but taking a step back to make sure that you are identifying the devices as they should be identified in market, it is the first and foremost step that you need to take, right? You want to make sure that you're always identifying CTV as the correct device type. Otherwise, it's going to send a different object type to the buyers to bid on, right? If it's classified as set-top box, for example, you might not see a high win rate because you're passing out metadata for CTV-based devices and vice versa. So taking a step back and identifying that is very, very important. And then in addition to that, making sure that you have the right metadata attributes to pass with those device types is going to be equally as important. And then to your point, breaking them out for demand partners could really help, right? And saying, look, we have a deal ID that we're going to pass you all of our set-top box inventory against. This is what's going to be passed in that pool of inventory. What can we pass on our side, or what can we layer onto that can make it more attractive to buyers? And then continuing to keep that conversation open as they transact on it is really important, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that publishers can do to not only adjust the data that's being passed within our system to demand partners, but also there's a lot of insights that we have and we provide to our publishers, and they can use those insights to then pass to their demand partners, so that way they can increase bidding behavior and see higher monetization trends on different device types such as set-top box.
Yeah, because ultimately, for a lot of buyers that are thinking about executing programmatically, and they're obviously thinking about audience and targeting and whatever else, for set-top box specifically, because the identity might be challenging for that to be fully addressable on the DSP side. Obviously, the publisher layering and some targeting on the deal side is probably going to be beneficial to help meet the needs of that particular buyer or that campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see this across like not just set-top box or CTV, but there's mobile web inventory that is equally premium, right? It might be long form inventory, might be running for 15, 30 minutes in some cases. And we see high viewership there, but because of the misconception in the market of, hey, CTV is premium, mobile web may be less premium than that, we're not seeing buyers bid against that pool of inventory. And also there's other attributes that are passed with that pool of inventory, and it may rely on IDs, which the DSP side needs to match against, we need to match against, to ensure that we are increasing the bidding behavior on both ends. So I think like there's a lot of pools of inventory that are in market, and it's just educating the supply side in how to evangelize that pool of supply, while also continuing to educate the demand side on how to bid on that supply.
So circling back to the sort of 70-30 ratio that you shared in terms of, programmatic versus direct sold inventory across the publishers that you guys work with, how much have you seen that, that ratio change over the last 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, the ratio has changed for a lot of partners that we've worked with over the last couple of years. Historically, it's always skewed a lot more on the direct sold side of things. Programmatic was really just a sandbox over the last 5 years that I think scaled up a lot more so in the last couple of years alone, and is continuing to scale. There hasn't historically been budgets tied to programmatic for businesses, as you and I both know, right? And now businesses are really looking at it as its driving force of revenue, in addition to those locked in upfront budgets that are continued to see year over year. But where is the incrementality? Where is the growth? Programmatic is seen as that engine. So over the course of the last couple of years alone, we've seen this grow. I think we'll continue to see it grow, but I definitely do not think that direct will really decrease a lot more than where it is today. I think it will decrease a little bit. Maybe we'll see a 50-50 split in the future, but I don't think direct IO budgets are going away anytime soon. Direct IO is really, really important to lock in, but where customers see the growth is definitely from the incremental demand side of the house.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you guys were out in market with somewhat recently is obviously programmatic inventory in and around the Olympics. Can you share a little bit on sort of how that went, or sort of what the adoption was?
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw a lot of success from programmatic in the Olympics. It was a small portion of the pool, of the overall pool of supply, but of the portion of the supply that we did activate from a programmatic perspective, we did see success with that. And not only are we seeing success on the Olympics, but we also have other publishers that are enabling live sports inventory from a programmatic perspective, and we're seeing that perform really, really well. But it's important to take a step back and make sure that we outline that those publishers are typically first and foremost direct sold on the live sports segment, and we're going to continue to see it that way. But applying programmatic demand to allow for bidding on the incremental supply that is in market it is very important. The only problem with that is really on the demand side. We need to make sure that demand partners are ready for that live sports inventory to hit the market. Historically, I know some people know this, but historically DSPs haven't been able to handle the traffic spike that comes with premium live sports inventory. There's a high level of QPS associated with that, and typically when we see high increased volume of supply, it's flagged as IBT on the demand side. Obviously, that's changing. Demand partners are adjusting their algorithms to ensure that they can handle these types of traffic spikes if they know well in advance they're coming. But we're working with them to support this so that way we can continue to enable our publishers and our partners to activate more premium live sports inventory from a programmatic lens.
Yeah, it's really challenging both from the buy side and like the tech on the DSP, as you just described, to sort of actually activate on that. But it does represent a potential, a very interesting sort of win-win solution for both the buy side and the publisher side, in terms of there's an incremental spike in traffic on a particular game or event that nobody was sort of quantifying for or couldn't quantify for it. Project it, and from a direct sales perspective, in which case there's, obviously an opportunity for programmatic buyers to sort of jump in on that if they got everything set up the right way. For the sake of just making sure everybody's following along, can you briefly define QPS and IVT?
Yes. Sorry. QPS is queries per second. Should have taken a step back to define that. So there's a queries per second ratio that everybody's looking at, right? Like, how many queries per second am I ingesting? How many bid requests are coming my way? There's hosting costs associated with that. And so you want to make sure that you are monetizing that inventory in a way that makes sense and in a way that balances out the costs of hosting for you as a demand partner. And so from the demand side, if we're getting an influx of supply, that may be flagged as fraudulent supply because it's not what we're typically used to seeing from partners, right? Like, we're used to seeing X number of supply come through from X partner. And then once we see that surpass the threshold, by tenfold, then it may be seen as fraudulent supply. And so at that point, the bidding behavior just stops. And so we don't tend to see, historically, we haven't seen live sports inventory monetize really well programmatically because DSP partners and demand partners just weren't ready for that pool of supply to hit the market. But as we've started to work closer with them and educated them on when that pool of supply is being activated, they're ready to handle it. And so from the publisher side, it's great because you're not going to sell every single slot. Imagine a game goes into overtime. Maybe you have more supply all of a sudden that you need to sell, and you can make that available programmatically to your partners to bid against. So it's an important sales channel, and it's something that we're really leaning into. We've always done live sports really well. And so as we continue to build on our programmatic and marketplace tech, that's something that we're going to advocate for our publishers on and work with our demand partners to be ready for that supply to hit the market.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. I mean, you guys have certainly been on the forefront of sort of trying to solve for live and in programmatic, given all the challenges, but opportunity that it also represents that you kind of highlighted. Just going back a little bit to the sort of programmatic versus direct, in terms of the feedback that you guys get from your publisher partners, what are they attributing that growth to? Is it a function of better tools and tech and ability to sort of monetize that inventory better? Is it a function of demand on the advertiser side or the buy side, or is it, a little bit of both?
Well, I think the tools and tech is really helping the publisher look holistically to understand what's available to them and when, to allow them to monetize their supply better, right? And so as we are enabling them to look at their supply in different ways, we're releasing insights by slicing up data in a way that is valuable and actionable to the publisher to understand. And with that, we also have information in our system to help clients. We also have tools at clients' disposal to help them layer into their deals so that way they can ensure that they're delivering against supply and pools of supply when they need it first before going to other pools of supply second. So yield optimization has been a big player there. And by ensuring that our customers are leaning on yield optimization tools to deliver against their direct sold campaigns in an efficient and effective manner, then it opens up more pools of supply for programmatic so they can increase their incremental demand. In addition to that, we're continuing to map to external demand sources, whether it be DSPs, whether it be external SSPs. It's going to be very important for us to really open up connections to our publishers based on who they need to connect to for demand, right? We want to make sure that all the demand that our customers need are at their disposal within our system. So that way we can take every piece of demand opportunity into consideration as we're making an ad decision. So this way we can continue to increase CPMs and revenue with our customers within the ad server.
Can you unpack just a little bit? Because I think one of the mysteries to a lot of folks on the buy side is exactly some of those tools that you kind of just highlighted that the publisher has, the levers, if you will, that they have to pull in order to maximize yield across all their inventory. So not just programmatic, but obviously what they're doing from a direct sales perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from a publisher standpoint, it's a little bit of a balancing act in terms of where you're delivering when. There's an ad priority that we help publishers manage, whether it be sponsorship, guarantees, backfill, open competition. That's first and foremost what publishers are going to look at. What priority am I setting up this deal? What is the impression goal against it? Am I a relationship first publisher versus a price first publisher? Meaning that am I gonna raise the priority of some partners over others in return for a lower CPM and higher scale? Or am I going to set everybody up at the same priority and then the best price wins, right? It's a strategy that different partners employ, and each strategy sees great results just depending on what works best for a business. But Freewheel allows for them to play around with prioritizations in a way that makes sense for their sales strategy. And then in addition to that, they have tools at their disposal to ensure that they're delivering against their O&O inventory first before they are delivering against acquired inventory, for example. And they could set certain thresholds to say, deliver on my inventory first, or deliver 20% of this campaign on my inventory first before you go to acquired inventory, before you go to my carriage inventory, before you go to other pools of inventory, or deliver first on this pool of inventory that within my O&O bucket, and then this other pool of inventory within my O&O bucket, and creating a tiered structure to ensure you're delivering where you need to deliver and meeting your advertiser needs from a direct sold perspective. And then doing the same on the programmatic side if you need to, but typically you do this on the direct sold side, so that way you open up more inventory for the programmatic end. And so there's a lot of levers that clients can pull from a yield optimization perspective, a data prioritization perspective, and then a metadata perspective too. So clients can control the metadata that they can pass to demand partners from an app and from a content end, and then they can also obfuscate that data, right? So maybe you don't want to send all of your signals to one demand partner. Maybe you want to send your inventory with obfuscated data signals at a lower price point. You can do that, right? And so we have abilities for them to play around with data in a way that makes sense for their business. And then lastly, maybe you want to set bid request thresholds, right? Maybe you're working with a partner and you want to ensure that you're controlling the QPS, or queries per second, as it pertains to their business. You can set a specific bid request cap per day, per hour, per week. So it can allow for you to monetize that supply in an effective manner with your demand partner.
At the end of the day, there's an endless amount of levers to pull in order to sort of shape delivery, whether it's on the direct sales side of the equation or the programmatic side of the equation. And like you said, clearly there's, the basic levers are going to be around price or going to be around relationship. Mostly that occurs on the direct side, it sounds like, is what you're saying, but that also can occur on the programmatic side. So while a lot of people will think about programmatic auctions as being, fair and balanced across all, on the buy side, right? Like all buyers have the crack at the same impression at the same time. In reality, functionally, that's not necessarily the case, correct?
Yeah, I mean, you have all the same levers within programmatic that you do in direct sold, right? And that's that's really something that's been asked of us as a business, as our clients expand on their programmatic business, and as upfront dollars have some commits on the programmatic side as well. We have tools that allow customers to monitor their upfront buy across direct sold and programmatic to see how they're delivering against it over the course of a year, right? And so I think it's important to outline that, yeah, we have a lot of tools at clients' disposal from a direct sold side of the house, but we have all the same tools available to our customers on the programmatic side as they continue to scale that business. The last thing that we would want is not to have parity there, so that way they can't migrate budgets to the programmatic side if they need to.
Yep. That makes a world of sense. So I think maybe one more question on how buyers should maybe think about, programmatic versus direct. Well, I guess two. So on the direct side, as we kind of talked about earlier, from a buy side perspective, in terms of how agencies and buyers sort of think about direct versus programmatic, is the general trade off is direct tends to come in at a lower price point, with maybe less targeting, ROS in many cases, or you're, cherry picking a few different sort of parameters from a targeting perspective. Whereas programmatic is basically the opposite, highly targeted based on sort of how you have things set up in the DSP, and it's going to come in at a higher price point from a CPM perspective. But as you noted earlier, on that direct side of the equation, a lot of targeting can be layered in on the publisher side. I'm curious to get your insight on how common, what's that trend line look like for that? Are people doing more of that, less of that? What's that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot more requests on the direct side for audience targeting on direct campaigns, and we're giving our publishers the tools to pull the audience segments that they need in order to scale those direct sold campaigns based on the demand needs. But from the demand side, yeah, they have the ability to layer on targeting attributes and ensure that they're targeting the audiences that they need to be targeting based on the data that's being provided to them via the ORTB pipes that we've built. But on the direct sold side of things, they're still monitoring delivery based off of the creative that they're appending on the publisher side. So they do have pixels that they're appending to that creative so that they can monitor delivery trends on their side. They can see viewability on their side. They can see IPT on their side. They can map it back to audiences as well. So while they may not have the full controls to run a campaign on their side, as they do on the programmatic end and adjust in the middle, there are more controls on the direct sold side of the house on the publisher end than there are on the demand side. But that's not to say the demand side isn't monitoring delivery. It doesn't have the controls on their side to see how that campaign's progressing over its life cycle. And then in addition to that, I know there's been a lot of requests for log level data on the direct side of things, right? And so the campaign's completed, but how is it delivered, right? Not just standard analytics, but looking deeper at log level analytics. We're empowering our publishers to pull that data through our V4 logs that we provide to all customers, whether it be on the programmatic side or the direct side. So as the advertisers' needs evolve, we're helping empower our publishers to evolve with that.
And is that those requests for log level data, is that driven by a need to sort of prop up attribution, or is that driven, to be able to better understand where and how things are delivering from a transparency perspective in terms of program and show and all that fun stuff?
I think it's more so attribution and delivery trends on the advertiser side. So the advertisers are starting to get more data on how inventory is delivered against, how the ads are being played out. And as they're receiving more of that, they're asking for more data on their side so that they can optimize their bidding behaviors against the pool of supply that they're bidding on, right? So historically, customers or agencies and advertisers have been over-indexed in certain areas versus others. And so they are now trying to see, okay, how can I increase my activity with X, Y, and Z publisher, and we're working with them on that. We're working with them to ensure that publishers are giving them the data that they need if they would like to. But in addition to that, we're also working directly with agencies and advertisers through our demand team to show them areas that they're over indexing and potentially opening up other avenues with other publishers that they may have not thought about, right? You can reach um, a demo and the audience that you're trying to reach across several different pools of supply, several different endpoints. And we have a lot of that under the Freewheel ecosystem. So it's a bit of an education. It's a bit of an education layer that we're working with our demand partners on and continuing to educate them on where they can target their audiences and how to best effectively deliver against the budget that they're held against.
Yeah, so really helping enable advertisers to, maximize their reach for the dollar for the investment and minimize, overlap across all the different sort of inventory sources or even, pools of inventory within an individual publisher ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's important to really work with those agency partners to educate them on how they're spending their budgets, and how to spend them in a more effective manner across a diverse pool of supply, potentially reaching the same audience, right? I think if you're reaching Jared when he's watching Paramount and NBC and other WBD and other potential partners, it's very good because you're not reaching him just on that one channel that he continues to watch. You're reaching the audience that you need to reach, an audience that will buy your product at the end of the day, across several different pools of supply, and that's really ultimately how you win. And so we're giving customers the ability to do that not only through a direct perspective, but also through a bundle capacity as we continue to build on the exchange that we built over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think one of the challenges that I've certainly experienced or run into over the last few years, helping brands to scale CTV and their investments in CTV, is sort of unpacking or understanding exactly what they're getting, whether that's from a content perspective or even in terms of audience and reach. Right? It's my view, our view at Diall-Up, that for most advertisers, you're going to be able to find a high percentage of reach for your primary target audience in CTV because it just happens to represent how most demos are consuming most of their content.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes sense, but it's just diversifying the CTV supply that you're purchasing against, right? Because you're going to think of the big five, six, seven, but there's hundreds out there, right? So there's a lot more pools of supply that you can pick from. What matches your campaign needs and your audience needs, and how can we help you get there? And so I think from a freewheel perspective, we're entering this space where we're working across both sides of the house, so supply and demand. And as we continue to do that, we're having conversations with both parties, and we're trying to make it so we're connecting the dots on both ends, and opening up dialogue between both partners, right? And so it's been a black box for the demand side on what's happening on the supply end, and vice versa. So we're trying to really unpack that and allow for there to be open dialogue between both parties, so that way we can optimize against the demand dollars flowing in and the pool of supply against that, right? And really, Freewheel is the middle point of both, and we're trying to evangelize the supply and market while also ensuring that we're fulfilling all of our partners' demand needs on the other end.
Yeah, and so I mean, you guys obviously again sort of sit in an interesting space where your primary focus is enablement, right? As a technology company, you're in the business of enabling all this stuff to happen, but you're also sitting in an interesting place where you're also playing a pretty critical role from an education perspective in order to get particularly publishers to think, but even advertisers, everybody, to think about how they buy and what they buy differently.
Yeah, exactly. I think, like, from a publisher standpoint, it's just continuing to educate them on marketplace programmatic adoption as their business evolves. And then from the demand side, also just continuing to educate demand partners that we've onboarded on how they're purchasing supply, and how they can do it in a more seamless manner, right? And so demand partners may have been purchasing supply in an always on setting. And we've seen this in the independent space quite a bit, right? That's a lot of green space for a lot of publishers in general from the independent agency side. So a lot of what we've been doing in the last couple of years alone has been educating not only holdcos on better bidding behavior, but independent agencies on, hey, we've noticed you guys are trying to acquire this pool of supply. Here's how you can do it better. And then bridging the gap between the supply and the demand side is always something that we're going to be focused on as we continue to scale up our marketplace tech.
I mean, last little question on this that I would be curious if you can provide some color commentary. I got to imagine that some of those conversations on the publisher side, in terms of, again, educating them on, some of the tools that you guys can bring to bear and some of the insights that you've maybe already shared with them with regard to sort of yield optimization, which functionally is an exercise of selling more at a higher price, right? But I got to imagine that in some cases that's met with a little bit of maybe not skepticism, but concern, as it potentially competes with how they thought about selling or monetizing their inventory for years, right? Like, again, most of this is being transacted in the upfronts. We're talking about moving more inventory and more monetization to programmatic. The dynamics of those two sort of marketplaces and how publishers think about buying and selling, inventory from that, but, in those two environments is wildly different.
Yeah. And so programmatic has been a big question mark for a lot of folks in our industry for a while now. And one of the biggest pieces of pushback that we receive is really like uh, the hesitance to move towards a programmatic based environment is mainly based on the focus that customers don't want it cannibalizing their direct IO business. And once we provide insights and ways for them to ensure that, hey, look, we're going to help you grow your incremental business while continuing to deliver on your direct IO business, then it opens up the door for a larger conversation. I think customers really, first and foremost, want to make sure that the programmatic side of the house is not going to cannibalize what they've been doing for years. And it will only provide incrementality towards it. And once we're able to show that through the tools that we have at our disposal and educating customers on how they can use the ad priorities across different modules to ensure that they're delivering against their direct sold needs, but also opening up opportunities to programmatic, is going to be a win-win scenario. Then customers start to lean in more and start to transact more programmatically, and that's when we see the sweet spot, and then we build on that to ensure that they're delivering more incremental delivery against it. And so, like, one of the tools that we released in the last couple of years was a tool to allow customers to send more inventory from their direct IO business towards programmatic if they're reaching a certain OSI threshold, right? If you're continuing to deliver that McDonald's campaign in a direct sold capacity and you're at 90% OSI, so you're delivering 90% of the budget, why not send some of those opportunities to programmatic where you can garner a higher CPM for that same opportunity while continuing to deliver on that direct IO? I think it allows for more demand diversity in the space and an overall better ad experience, right? You don't want to keep seeing the same 5, 6 ads over and over again. Once you introduce more demand diversity, it's going to create a better overall viewer experience. And that's ultimately something that a lot of our customers, they don't forget that, but it's something that our customers aren't looking at because you're in the weeds day in, day out. Taking a step back and looking at the overall viewer experience to understand how is this going to benefit our overall end viewer is equally as important. So building on programmatic while not cannibalizing your direct IO business and enhancing the viewer experience is the end goal here, and that's what we're in market to do.
That makes a ton of sense to me. I think from my perspective, programmatic in the context of CTV obviously creates a giant opportunity for publishers in particular to sort of onboard thousands of advertisers that have never been on linear TV and frankly probably never will be on TV, in which case they don't necessarily have a relationship with them currently, but are fantastic advertisers for CTV if you can, enable them to transact. And clearly there's a trend around that with a lot of these sort of, self-serve, tool sets that public on the publisher side have been released over the last couple months.
Yeah, and also I think like one of the things that publishers can glean from programmatic as you bring it onto your stack is you can use it as a lead gen tool, right? You could see how other advertisers are tapping into your inventory and potentially turn that opportunity into a direct IO opportunity, right? And so I think that opens up more opportunities for your sales team to increase growth. And it also opens up more opportunities for your advertisers to shift budgets if they need to. They may need to shift budgets from the direct business and move towards a PMP-like capacity. We've seen advertisers say they're shifting away from direct IO altogether. And so you want to make sure that your business is malleable enough to move with that, to continue capturing budgets and not really feel that hit.
100%. Couldn't agree more. I think one of the things I still talk about a lot is the concept of transactional flexibility, right? As a you know, as an upfront advertiser, you want to be able to have the flexibility to be able to change as your business change to go fully direct, fully programmatic, a mix of both, which is generally where most people land, et cetera, or maybe even move from linear or too linear, right? All those things can be challenging in terms of how publishers think about yield optimization. However, I think that's kind of the dynamics of, that we're living in today in terms of how advertisers need flexibility, or many of them need it.
Yeah. I mean, Jared, I love how you're moving forward into this new ether of a world of programmatic while continuing to maintain the old school name of Diall-Up Media. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah,
It's great.
nice.
You're not losing where you came from, but evolving on that.
Exactly. So one last question, we'll probably close it out. So, you sit in an interesting space in the ecosystem. You see a lot of stuff in terms of what your work at Freewheel that we talked about. Where are you excited, outside of Freewheel in the world of CTV or digital? What sort of what trends are you following? What's interesting to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think like everybody's interested in like where we're going from the AI space. How are we going to evolve? How is our industry going to evolve as AI continues to be enhanced year over year, day over day? How is that going to be best plugged into our industry to ensure that customers are seeing more revenue while viewer experience is maintained at the highest quality? And then the other big thing that I'm following is VR, right? Are we ever going to start to see that pick up to a point where we can start really advertising against it? And I think CTV is one space right now we've seen that evolve over the last 10 years. Is VR the next venture? Could be, could be others. And that's something that I'm keeping in the back of my head that like, look, over the last 20 or so years, we've evolved as an advertising business, going from linear to digital, from direct sold to programmatic, from set top box to CTV. What's the next space? Gaming is a big one. VR is a big one, and just continuing to be on top of where the industry is moving, and following those trend lines so that you're at the forefront of it, is very important. So, I mean, at Freewheel, we're positioned in a really good way where I'm able to follow all of that across the industry. So I benefit from that, but continuing to read industry trends and following that, from the ecosystem perspective is really important. So that's what I would urge everybody to do.
Yeah, you gotta stay on top of the new stuff. My personal opinion is it'll take a little bit of time on VR, but the Gemini stuff that came out was the last week with Mark, and Meta and Facebook. It looks pretty incredible. It's not, you can't buy it, right? But they're going down a very interesting path. It looks like.
Yeah, and Apple AI. I mean, there's a lot that's coming
Yeah,
out over the next couple of years that I think is going to really wow everybody. So we've moved quick over the last 10 years alone. Who's to say where we're going to be in the next 5?
yeah, couldn't agree with you more on that. I think one of the clear and obvious trends in media and advertising is that it is a far from stagnant ecosystem, and things are only accelerating in terms of pace of change versus decelerating overall. So anyway, really appreciate your time. Thank you, Hamer, for joining us. And I think hopefully we helped people understand the sort of the dynamics of, or not us, really you, helped everybody understand the dynamics of, how publishers are thinking about, monetizing their inventory, the unique role that Freewheel plays in that, and as a result, maybe some smarter questions that buyers can start asking their publishing partners as they go and think about their next campaign.
Yeah. Yeah. I thank you for having me here. And hopefully this will spark some more conversation between the supply and the demand side. I know there's always going to be questions that come, and we're happy to help where need be. And hopefully, as we continue to build on supply tech, we can help our demand partners continue to grow their businesses as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jared.